I never thought a simple phone call could turn my world upside down. At 65, I was used to the quiet routine of my life in Cheyenne, Wyoming. A modest apartment, the occasional grumble from my neighbor, Ellen Parker, about a sprinkler leak or a noisy lawnmower, and the steady rhythm of my work at the local power plant. Life was simple, predictable, and safe. Before we dive into family betrayal, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Hearing from people around the world makes these stories even more powerful and reminds us how connected we all are. That morning, I was kneeling on my kitchen floor, scrubbing ceramic shards from a broken coffee cup. The sprinkler system I'd installed last month had a faulty joint, and Ellen's yard had turned into a soggy mess once again. Her voice carried sharply through the thin walls, her complaints a constant backdrop to my days. As much as I wanted to ignore it, her frustration reminded me how lonely life had become since Rebecca was gone. The phone rang. I didn't want to answer. I figured it was Ellen calling to complain about the sprinklers again. But the voice on the other end wasn't Ellen. It was Janet Morrison from a law firm in Cheyenne. Mr. Miller, this is Janet Morrison from Morrison Welsh & Associates. I'm calling about Rebecca Elizabeth Miller. Rebecca. The name hit me like a punch in the chest. My Rebecca. My ex-wife. The woman who had once promised me forever and then built an empire out of the pieces of our shattered marriage. I tightened my grip on the phone as Janet delivered the news Rebecca had passed away 3 days ago. The funeral service would be held on Friday at Pinewood Memorial Chapel, followed by a reading of her will at the firm's downtown office. I sank into my kitchen chair, the room spinning slightly. For 3 days, I'd been worrying about sprinkler leaks and cold coffee, while Rebecca had slipped away without me knowing. I stared out the window at Ellen, who was inspecting her soggy garden again. Her complaints seemed trivial now, muffled by the weight of what I'd just heard. The days that followed were a blur. I cleaned my apartment twice, pressed my one good suit, and rehearsed conversations I knew would never come. I wrestled with 1,000 questions. Why hadn't Rebecca told me she was sick? Why had she kept me in the dark? Friday morning was gray and cold. Typical Wyoming spring. Standing in front of the bathroom mirror, adjusting a tie I hadn't worn in years, I barely recognized the man staring back. Silver hair replaced the brown, and lines etched the story of quiet disappointments across my face. Driving through Cheyenne, I watched neighborhoods shift from working-class homes to the manicured lawns of Rebecca's circle, the people she had built her life with after me. I parked my old Honda among sleek Lexuses and Cadillacs, feeling like an outsider at a celebration I wasn't invited to. Pinewood Memorial Chapel was filled with over 200 people, friends, business associates, strangers who had known Rebecca far better than I ever had. Whispers followed me as I slipped into a back pew. I caught fragments of conversation. Her ex-husband. Can you believe he showed up after all he did to her? Then I saw him, David, our son. 37 years old, dressed sharp, his presence commanding the room. He spotted me immediately, his expression hard as stone. What are you doing here? His voice echoed through the chapel, silencing whispers. I came to pay my respects, I said quietly, meeting his gaze. You lost that right 15 years ago. The tension in the room was thick. David stepped closer, his eyes blazing with contempt. She wouldn't want you here. Maybe not, I replied, but I needed to be. David's voice rose. You embarrassed her enough when she was alive. Don't make it worse now. 200 eyes turned toward us. I felt every judgment like a weight crushing me. But this time I stood my ground. I'm not here to cause trouble. I loved Rebecca for 40 years, 22 as her husband, 18 more, as someone who wished her well despite everything. I'm here because once we made promises that mattered. I choose to honor that. David's fury faltered, surprised by my resistance. The chapel buzzed with uneasy silence until the funeral director called the service to order. The eulogies painted Rebecca as a visionary, a woman who had overcome every obstacle. Business leaders spoke of her innovation and leadership. I listened feeling a mix of pride and sorrow. After the service, most people approached David for condolences. No one looked my way. As the chapel emptied, a man in an impeccable suit approached me. "Mr. Miller, I'm David Reynolds from Morrison, Welsh and Associates. May I have a word?" Exhausted, I nodded. Rebecca left specific instructions about the reading of her will. "Both you and David must be present. It's essential." I blinked. "Both of us," David Reynolds nodded. "Yes, Mr. Miller. It's the law and her wish." David appeared beside me, his impatience barely masked. "Try not to make this harder than it has to be," he said with a sneer. The 3-block walk to the law office felt heavier than the miles. The Victorian-style building smelled of polished wood and leather, Rebecca's kind of place. Inside, David took the seat closest to the desk. I sat slightly apart, the outsider again. David Reynolds opened a thick file and began reading the will. Specific bequests. First, the family home and $500,000 to David. David smiled, but I saw the calculation behind it. That wasn't everything. Then came the shock. $33.5 million plus controlling interest in Rebecca's company to me. My mouth fell open. My life of quiet dignity suddenly collided with the impossible reality of Rebecca's final gift. David's face turned pale, then red with fury. He accused me of manipulation, fraud, coercion. David Reynolds calmly assured us of Rebecca's sound mind and mental competency. David exploded, calling it criminal fraud, demanding investigations. I sat frozen, but heard Rebecca's voice in my mind, strong, resolute, loving. Then came the reading of her personal letter to us both. A letter full of apologies, truths, and hope. Rebecca had never stopped loving me, even when I felt unworthy. She explained why she left most to me, because I deserved a chance to prove that character mattered more than wealth. And she told David that he needed to find himself beyond her fortune. The room fell silent. I held her words like a lifeline, ready to face the future with humility and strength. David left in a storm of rage, but I remained. For the first time in years, I felt worthy. And I knew this was just the beginning. If you're still watching, comment 1, so I know you're still with me. The weight of Rebecca's letter sat heavily in my hands, as if her words had woven an invisible chain, binding me to a future I hadn't dared to imagine. For 15 years, I had lived quietly on the edges of her world, a man who once had shared a life with a woman whose ambitions far outpaced mine. Now suddenly, I was thrust to the center stage of the empire she built, with a fortune that could change everything. But what did I know about running a business? I was a power plant worker, used to keeping the lights on for a small Wyoming town, not managing millions or steering corporate strategy. I remembered those years, standing in the glow of the control room. The hum of turbines beneath my feet, a world so different from the one Rebecca had created. David, our son, loomed larger than life in my mind. I thought back to his boyhood, the way his eyes sparkled with promise as he navigated computers and digital worlds I barely understood. I recalled the gulf between us growing wider every year, filled with his judgment and my quiet confusion. He'd always believed I was holding him back, that my simple values were a chain around his ambitions. The memory of his birthday party stung the lavish affair Rebecca orchestrated, more a business networking event than a celebration of a teenage boy. I remembered seeing him by the pool, trying to smile but clearly lost amidst the polished faces and designer clothes. That boy who once curled up in my lap after a fishing trip or a bedtime story seemed to have vanished. Rebecca's sacrifices haunted me too. How many dinners missed, how many phone calls answered, while David waited for her attention. She had given so much to build a legacy, and yet somehow in the process, our family slipped through her fingers. But here I was, holding her last wishes the key to the empire she had built. The irony was cruel. David's fury had been unmistakable during the will, reading his accusations, his venom all directed at me. Yet beneath it all, I sensed a desperation, a need to understand why his mother had chosen this path. After the meeting, I walked the streets of Cheyenne, letting the cool spring air clear my head. The city was waking up, shops opening, coffee brewing, neighbors chatting over fences. Life continued indifferent to the turmoil inside me. My phone buzzed with messages from old friends and coworkers offering condolences and curious questions. Most wanted to know if I was okay, but some hinted at the gossip already swirling about the will. I wasn't sure how to feel. Angry, grateful, lost. All at once. That evening, I found myself sitting on my small porch, the sun dipping behind the rolling hills. Ellen Parker was tending her garden next door, waving hello with a tentative smile. For a moment, I thought about the years we'd spent trading complaints about sprinklers and noisy neighbors. Simple troubles that now felt insignificant. I remembered the early days with Rebecca before the empire, before the fights. How she had stormed into Murphy's Diner years ago, challenging unfair hiring practices with fire in her voice. That moment of defiance had drawn me in, made me believe in her fierce spirit. I had fallen in love with the woman who refused to settle for less. But love wasn't always enough. As I sat there, the reality settled in. This inheritance was more than money. It was a chance for redemption, a test of character, and a call to action. The next morning, I reached out to David Reynolds, the lawyer, to ask about what lay ahead. He was patient and reassuring, outlining the steps for transferring ownership, attending board meetings, and understanding corporate governance. The road would be long, but not impossible. I also received a call from a woman named Susan, Rebecca's longtime assistant. She spoke warmly, describing Rebecca's meticulous nature and the care she had taken to protect the company's future. Susan offered to guide me through the company's operations and introduced me to a few key staff members. With every conversation, I felt the distance between the life I had lived and the one I was about to step into. But the hardest part remained facing David. Our next meeting was tense. He refused to accept the will, accusing me of manipulation and fraud. I tried to explain, to remind him of his mother's letter, but his anger was impenetrable. "Dad, Tana," he said one day, voice low but fierce. "This isn't just about money. It's about loyalty. You walked away from us. You don't get to come back and claim what's hers, what's mine." His words pierced me. I had been absent, yes. Not out of cruelty, but out of feeling lost and inadequate beside a woman I loved but couldn't keep up with. "I'm here now," I said quietly. "Not to take, but to honor her wishes. To do right by her legacy and by you." He shook his head, eyes flashing. "We'll see about that." That night I sat alone, rereading Rebecca's letter. Her faith in me was a fragile light in the darkness. She had seen something worth saving in me, a strength built on patience, integrity, and quiet service. I knew this was my chance, not just to claim an inheritance, but to rebuild a family fractured by pride and misunderstanding. And so, with the spring breeze whispering through the trees, I made a promise to myself, to Rebecca's memory, and to the sun I still hoped to reach, that I would rise to this challenge no matter how steep the climb. The days that followed felt like walking through a storm without an umbrella. Every call, every meeting with lawyers and company executives, every moment spent trying to understand the world Rebecca had built, reminded me of how far removed I was from the life I'd suddenly inherited. But the hardest storm was the one I faced at home with David. He was relentless, a force of nature fueled by years of resentment. Our conversations, once tentative and hopeful, now exploded into shouting matches that shook the walls of my apartment. "You think you can just walk into my mother's world and take it all?" David yelled one evening, slamming his fist on the kitchen table. I'm not taking anything that's not hers to give.